Imagine an island where time has stood still for 60,000 years. A place where the outside world is not just unwelcome, but deadly to approach. Where arrows fly at helicopters, where shipwrecked sailors disappear without trace, and where the Indian government has drawn an exclusion zone that nobody can cross. This is North Sentinel Island, a small forested landmass in the Bay of Bengal, home to one of the last uncontacted tribes on Earth. The Sentinelese people have refused all contact with the modern world. They attack anyone who comes near. And Indian law protects their isolation absolutely. In 2018, an American missionary named John Allen Shaw tried to reach the island to convert the tribe to Christianity. He was killed on the beach, his body never recovered. The Indian government didn't prosecute the Sentinelese. Instead, they prosecuted the fishermen who took Shaw there. Why is this island so forbidden? Why does India enforce a 3-mile exclusion zone around it? And why have the Sentinelese violently rejected every attempt at contact for generations? The answer lies in geography, history, disease, and a profound choice made by a people who want nothing to do with civilization. North Sentinel Island is not just forbidden by law. It's forbidden by the people who live there. They have made their decision clear. Leave us alone. And the world, for once, is listening. This is not a story about mystery or adventure. This is a story about sovereignty, survival, and respect for a people who have every reason to fear outsiders. The island sits in the Andaman Archipelago, a chain of islands between India and Myanmar. It's surrounded by coral reefs that make landing difficult. Dense jungle covers the interior. And somewhere in that forest live between 50 and 500 people who represent one of humanity's oldest unbroken cultures. They speak a language nobody understands. They hunt with bows and arrows, and they want no part of our world. North Sentinel Island is small, only about 60 square kilometers, roughly the size of Manhattan. It sits in the Indian Ocean, part of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, which belong to India. The island is ringed by coral reefs that create a natural barrier, making approach by boat treacherous and landing nearly impossible, except in a few spots. From the air, it looks like paradise: dense tropical forest, white sand beaches, turquoise waters. But this is not a tourist destination. It's one of the most dangerous places on Earth for outsiders. The Indian government has declared a 3-mile exclusion zone around the entire island. No fishing, no tourism, no research, no contact of any kind. The Sentinelese are believed to have lived on this island for 50 to 60,000 years. They are direct descendants of the first humans who migrated out of Africa and reached the Andaman Islands during the Paleolithic era. While the rest of humanity developed agriculture, built cities, invented writing, and eventually created the internet, the Sentinelese remained isolated. They are hunter-gatherers. They live in small bands, build temporary shelters, and survive on fish, coconuts, wild pigs, and whatever they can hunt or gather from the forest. They make fire, craft sophisticated bows and arrows, and build outrigger canoes for fishing in the shallow waters around the island. Their technology has not changed in millennia, not because they are incapable of change, but because they have no reason to change. The island provides everything they need. The coral reefs are rich with fish. The forest provides shelter and game. The climate is tropical, so they need minimal clothing. They have no known enemies except outsiders. And they have made it abundantly clear that outsiders are not welcome. Their isolation is not accidental. It's a choice, reinforced generation after generation by violence against anyone who attempts contact. And that choice has kept them alive when other tribes in the Andaman Islands have been decimated or destroyed. The Sentinelese are not the only indigenous people in the Andaman Islands. Once, dozens of tribes lived across the archipelago, each with distinct languages and cultures. But colonization, disease, and forced assimilation destroyed most of them. The Sentinelese survived because they fought back. The British colonized the Andaman Islands in the mid-19th century, establishing a penal colony on the larger islands. They knew about North Sentinel Island and made several attempts to contact the tribe. In 1867, a British expedition landed on the island and kidnapped an elderly couple and 4 children. The adults died almost immediately, likely from disease. The children were returned with gifts, but the damage was done. This single event may have shaped Sentinelese attitudes toward outsiders forever. They learned that contact brings death. Disease, violence, kidnapping, these are the lessons colonialism taught them. And they remembered. Every subsequent attempt at contact was met with arrows, stones, and hostility. The British eventually gave up. After India gained independence in 1947, the Indian government continued sporadic contact attempts. In the 1970s and 80s, anthropologists led expeditions to North Sentinel Island, bringing gifts of coconuts, bananas, and metal tools. Sometimes the Sentinelese accepted the gifts. Other times they attacked. The contact teams never stayed long and never went inland. In 1991, there was a brief moment of peaceful contact when a Sentinelese group waded into the water to accept coconuts from anthropologists. It seemed like a breakthrough, but it was an anomaly. Soon after, the Sentinelese returned to hostility. The Indian government officially ended all contact attempts in 1996, concluding that continued interaction posed too great a risk to the tribe. The risk was disease. The Sentinelese have no immunity to common illnesses like influenza, measles, or even the common cold. A single contact event could trigger an epidemic that would wipe out the entire population. This is not theoretical. It happened to other Andaman tribes. The Sentinelese, whether consciously or instinctively, understood this danger and acted accordingly. The most famous violent encounter happened in 2006. Two Indian fishermen illegally entered the exclusion zone, anchored their boat near the island, and fell asleep. The Sentinelese killed them both. Their bodies were never recovered. An Indian Coast Guard helicopter attempted a retrieval mission but was driven away by a hail of arrows. The Indian government did not retaliate. They did not send police or military. They left the bodies and withdrew. Because Indian law recognizes the Sentinelese as a sovereign people with the right to defend their territory. The exclusion zone exists to protect them, and anyone who violates it does so at their own risk. This legal protection is extraordinary. In most of the world, isolated indigenous groups are pressured to integrate. Their lands are confiscated, their resources exploited. But India has taken the opposite approach with the Sentinelese. They are protected by law, and their isolation is respected as a fundamental human right. The Indian Penal Code exempts them from prosecution for acts of violence against intruders. But this protection is fragile. The exclusion zone is difficult to enforce. Fishermen occasionally drift into restricted waters. Poachers seek valuable resources. And then there are the missionaries. John Allen Shaw was not the first outsider to try reaching the island for religious reasons, and he likely won't be the last. Shaw made multiple illegal trips to the island in November 2018, paying fishermen to take him close enough to wade ashore. He carried gifts, a waterproof Bible, and a conviction that he was meant to bring Christianity to the Sentinelese. On his final trip, he was killed. The fishermen saw the tribe drag his body across the beach. It was never recovered. The Indian government faced international pressure to retrieve Chow's body, but they refused. Mounting a recovery operation would require overwhelming force, would violate the tribe's sovereignty, and would risk exposing the Sentinelese to disease. Chow's body remains on the island. His death became a global symbol of the conflict between missionary zeal and indigenous rights. So why does India protect the Sentinelese so fiercely? The answer is rooted in history, law, and ethics. India has seen the consequences of forced contact with isolated tribes. Across the Andaman Islands, indigenous populations collapsed after British colonization. Disease, exploitation, and cultural destruction followed contact. The great Andamanese people once numbered between 5,000 and 8,000. Today, fewer than 50 survive. The Onge tribe has been reduced to a few hundred. The Jarawa, another isolated group, have only recently begun limited contact, and already they face threats from disease, poaching, and cultural erosion. The pattern is clear: contact kills. The Indian government learned from these tragedies. In the 1990s, they adopted a policy of non-interference with uncontacted tribes. The Sentinelese became the test case. If isolation is what they want, then isolation is what they get. The exclusion zone is enforced by the Indian Coast Guard and the Andaman and Nicobar administration. But there's also a deeper philosophical reason. The Sentinelese represent something rare in the modern world, a people who have chosen their own path. They are not primitive or backward. They are simply different. Their society functions without money, without government, without technology beyond what they need. They have survived for 60,000 years. Who are we to say they should change? This perspective challenges the modern assumption that progress is universal and inevitable. The Sentinelese reject that assumption. They have seen what contact brings, and they want no part of it. Their arrows are not acts of aggression. They are acts of self-defense. They are saying, in the only language outsiders seem to understand, stay away. And yet the question remains, can their isolation last? Climate change is raising sea levels, threatening low-lying islands. Coral reefs are dying. Fish stocks are depleting. The modern world encroaches even on the most remote places. The Sentinelese cannot isolate themselves from these global forces. The exclusion zone protects them from people, but not from the consequences of industrial civilization. There's also the question of what we don't know. Almost everything about the Sentinelese is speculation. Their population is estimated between 50 and 500, but nobody knows for sure. Their language has never been recorded or studied. Their social structure, beliefs, and daily lives are entirely unknown. We don't know if they have leaders, shamans, or complex rituals. What we do know comes from brief, distant observations. They build temporary shelters made from palm fronds and branches. They make fire, probably using friction methods. They fish with bows and arrows and spears, and they build small canoes for navigating the shallow reefs. They appear to live in small mobile groups rather than permanent villages. Some observers have reported seeing evidence of metalworking, using scrap metal that washes ashore from shipwrecks. They hammer it into arrowheads and tools. This shows adaptability and ingenuity. They're not frozen in time. They take what is useful from the outside world and ignore the rest. But they take it on their own terms, not ours. After the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, there was global concern for the Sentinelese. The tsunami devastated the Andaman Islands, killing thousands. Helicopters flew over North Sentinel Island to assess damage. The Sentinelese responded by shooting arrows at the helicopters. This was interpreted as a sign they had survived. The coral reefs may have absorbed much of the tsunami's energy, and the Sentinelese likely moved to higher ground. This resilience is remarkable. The Sentinelese have survived natural disasters, colonial expansion, and the modern world's encroachment without outside help. They rely entirely on their knowledge of the island, their skills, and their social cohesion. This is not primitive. This is mastery of their environment. But it also reveals a troubling truth. We romanticize their isolation while doing nothing to address the threats they face. We admire their independence while our emissions warm the oceans and bleach the reefs they depend on. We protect them legally, but not environmentally. The exclusion zone is meaningless if the island becomes uninhabitable. The ethics of contact are complicated. On one hand, the Sentinelese have made their wishes clear. They want to be left alone. Respecting that choice is a matter of human rights. Forced contact, even with good intentions, is a form of colonialism. It assumes we know better than they do how they should live. On the other hand, what if they face a crisis they cannot solve alone? What if disease, famine, or environmental collapse threatens their survival? Should the world intervene? And if so, who decides? The Sentinelese cannot consent to help because there's no way to communicate with them. Any intervention, no matter how well-intentioned, would be imposed against their will. This dilemma has no easy answer. Some anthropologists argue that the best help we can offer is continued protection and environmental preservation. Keep the exclusion zone in place. Monitor the island from a distance. Ensure that illegal fishing and poaching are prevented. Let the Sentinelese determine their own future. They have survived for 60,000 years. They don't need our rescue. Others argue that we have a moral obligation to offer assistance if they face existential threats. But how do we offer help to people who attack anyone who approaches? How do we respect their autonomy while acknowledging their vulnerability? These questions reflect a broader tension in how we think about indigenous rights, sovereignty, and global responsibility. The truth is that the Sentinelese are not living in a bubble. They are affected by the same forces that affect everyone: climate change, ocean acidification, illegal fishing, marine pollution. The difference is that they have no voice in the systems that create these problems. They cannot vote, lobby, or participate in global climate negotiations. Their fate is determined by decisions made thousands of kilometers away, and yet they persist. They have outlasted empires, survived colonization, and resisted assimilation. Their isolation is not weakness. It's strength. They have maintained their culture, their language, and their way of life while the world around them changed beyond recognition. That is not backwardness. That is resilience. North Sentinel Island also raises questions about tourism and exploitation. In an age where every corner of the planet has been photographed, mapped, and commodified, the Sentinelese remain off limits. This makes them a source of fascination. Documentaries, articles, and YouTube videos speculate about their lives. But this fascination can easily become fetishization. The Sentinelese are not a mystery to be solved. They are not a tourist attraction or an anthropological curiosity. They are human beings with the right to privacy and self-determination. Yet the modern world struggles with this concept. We are used to access. We expect that every place can be visited, every culture studied, every people engaged. The Sentinelese reject that expectation. Some tour operators in the Andaman Islands have tried to capitalize on the island's mystique, offering boat trips near the exclusion zone. These trips are illegal and dangerous. They violate the tribe's rights and put both tourists and the Sentinelese at risk. The Indian government has prosecuted operators who violate the exclusion zone, but enforcement is difficult in such remote waters. There's also a darker side, the exploitation of the Sentinelese image. Their story is told and retold, often without context, often sensationalized. They are portrayed as the last Stone Age tribe or the most dangerous people on Earth. These narratives strip away their humanity and reduce them to spectacle. They become characters in a story rather than people with agency. The reality is more complex. The Sentinelese are not frozen in time. They use modern materials when they wash ashore. They respond to changing conditions. They make choices. They are not relics of the past. They are people living in the present, navigating the world on their own terms. Respecting them means accepting that we will never fully understand their lives, and that's okay. The best way to honor the Sentinelese is to leave them alone. Not out of fear, but out of respect. They have drawn their boundary. The world should respect it. The exclusion zone is not just a legal barrier. It's a recognition of their sovereignty, their autonomy, and their right to exist without interference. So what does the future hold for North Sentinel Island? There are 3 possible scenarios. The first is continued isolation. The exclusion zone remains in place. The Indian government continues to protect the island. The Sentinelese continue to live as they have for millennia. This is the best-case scenario, but it requires sustained political will, environmental protection, and enforcement of the exclusion zone. The second scenario is forced contact. A natural disaster, a disease outbreak, or environmental collapse forces intervention. The Indian government must choose between respecting the tribe's autonomy and preventing their extinction. This would be a tragedy, but it's not impossible. Climate change makes it more likely every year. Rising seas, dying reefs, and depleted fish stocks could make the island uninhabitable. The third scenario is extinction. The Sentinelese population may already be too small to sustain itself genetically. Inbreeding, disease, or natural disasters could wipe them out before anyone realizes what happened. Their language, their culture, and 60,000 years of human history would disappear without a trace. The world would never know what was lost. Which scenario unfolds depends on forces beyond the Sentinelese control. They cannot stop climate change. They cannot control illegal fishing. They cannot prevent the occasional outsider from attempting contact. Their fate rests in the hands of the Indian government, international law, and the willingness of the world to respect their choice. So far, that willingness is held. But for how long? There's also the question of what happens if the Sentinelese choose to make contact. It's possible. Circumstances change. New generations may make different decisions. If they ever reach out, the world must be ready to respond carefully, respectfully, and with full awareness of the risks. Contact must be on their terms, at their pace, with their consent. Anything else is colonialism. For now, North Sentinel Island remains forbidden. The Sentinelese remain isolated, and the world for once is respecting a boundary. It's a fragile peace, but it's peace nonetheless. The island sits in the Bay of Bengal, a green dot on the map, a place where time has not stood still, but simply moved differently. A place where humanity's oldest story continues, untouched and unchanged. North Sentinel Island is forbidden because the people who live there have made it so. They are not victims of isolation. They are architects of it. They have seen what the modern world offers, and they have rejected it. Their arrows are not acts of savagery. They are declarations of sovereignty. Leave us alone. This is our home. We do not want what you are offering. And the world, slowly, is learning to listen. India's protection of the Sentinelese is imperfect, but it's significant. It acknowledges that not everyone wants progress, that not everyone needs rescue, and that isolation can be a choice rather than a tragedy. The exclusion zone is a rare example of restraint in a world obsessed with expansion and connection. But respecting their isolation is not enough. We must also protect the environment they depend on. The coral reefs, the fish stocks, the forests, these are not separate from the Sentinelese. They are their world. Climate change threatens that world. Illegal fishing depletes it. Marine pollution contaminates it. If we truly respect the Sentinelese, we must address these threats. Sovereignty means nothing if the land becomes uninhabitable. The story of North Sentinel Island is a mirror. It reflects our assumptions about progress, civilization, and what it means to live a good life. The Sentinelese challenge the idea that there is only one path forward. They show us that survival does not require smartphones, medicine, or global trade. It requires knowledge, community, and a deep connection to place. They also remind us of what we have lost. Most of humanity has forgotten how to live without technology, without systems, without infrastructure. We depend on supply chains, electricity, and institutions. The Sentinelese depend on themselves. They are, in a sense, the last free people on Earth. Not because they live in paradise, but because they answer to no one but themselves. North Sentinel Island will remain forbidden as long as the Sentinelese wish it. Their isolation is their right. Their violence is their defense. And their survival is their triumph. The world owes them nothing but respect, protection, and the space to live as they choose. This is not a mystery to be solved. This is a boundary to be honored. And in a world that respects so few boundaries, that alone makes North Sentinel Island extraordinary.